Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head over to Estonia once again, and we're going to have a look at yet another of the beers that I brought back with me from a recent trip over there. So we're going to go to another brewery that I've never tried anything from before, and the beer that we're tasting today is a style that I very much enjoy, but it's not one that you come across all that often these days, which I think is quite unfortunate because I've always enjoyed this. But yeah, we've had some great beers from Estonia already. Fingers crossed this one carries on in the same vein. Hopefully it's another good beer, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. It's always cool to introduce new Estonian breweries to you here on the channel. But yeah, for this review we will go to a little place called Advere, which is right in the centre of Estonia, and we're having a look at my first beer from Nöösker Pruulikoda. So this particular beer is called Rahutu Loom. It comes in at 8% ABV, and this one is an American style brown ale. So yeah, really curious to see how this one turns out. If you've been watching the channel from the very early days, you might happen to know that one of my favourite beers back in the day was Brooklyn Brown, and that was my first introduction to the American brown ale style, and it just really stuck with me. So whenever I see a brown ale, there's a very good chance that I'm going to buy it actually, and that was the main idea behind buying this one. But I bought this beer in Gambrinus in Tartu in the southeast of Estonia, a lovely little city incidentally, and I would highly recommend that you check it out. And Gambrinus is an awesome beer shop with a lot of things that you won't find in other places, so that is definitely worth checking out as well. But yeah, this one I think could make for a really interesting beer, and it's nice to have another brown ale on the channel for the first time in quite a long time. I couldn't tell you what the last brown ale I reviewed was actually. So yeah, let's crack on with this one then. So, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that hopefully I can do in the future from Nöösker Pruulikoda. This is the very first time I'm trying one of their beers, as I mentioned to you, but there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries as well. There is one for the Estonian beers that I'm reviewing for you. That's being added to fairly regular at the moment because I still have quite a few Estonian beers left, and I will no doubt pick up a few more once this current supply runs dry a little bit later on as well. But yeah, always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. And I will apologise in advance for the history section for any bad Estonian pronunciations. Very difficult language, of course. But anyway, to tell you a little bit about Nöösker Pruulikoda then, on to my brewery notes. So, Nöösker Pruulikoda, as I've mentioned to you already, have their roots in Advere, which is right in the centre of Estonia. But the company was founded back in April of 2015 by father and son Christian and Ilmar Aurioja, along with Christian's colleague Antti. So two of them are lawyers, and the other one works in the forestry industry. And Ilmar apparently used to do extract home brewing, which is quite an interesting way of doing things. But apparently he and Christian just like to try different beers together, and often Antti would come and join them as well. But apparently they tried a Brewdog Abstract beer together, and this one was brewed with cherries, and this beer apparently was just really striking to them, and it got them thinking, we can probably do something even better by using all grain brewing, and that's what they did. So they apparently learned to do the all grain brewing from reading books and using information available on the internet, but they've also got a friend who has previously brewed for Brewdog and Cloudwater that takes part in the company as well, and apparently this friend has helped them out quite a lot. But this company operates as a contract brewery, and they brew the majority of the beers at Kebliku, which is quite close to Tartu in the southeast, but they also have brewed a number of their beers at Mustlips, which is, or Moostlips I should say, which is a smaller brewery in Advere itself. But they have brewed a couple of batches at Tanker and Leah, who of course have pretty big facilities. But they brew just a couple of batches a year, which gives them a rough output of around 3,000 litres apparently. And as of June 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced 19 different kinds of beer, according to Untappd. One of the things about this brewery is that they like to use a special ingredient in each of their beers. So their beers can vary quite a lot actually if you go through them. So they've used things like spruce tips, oak chips, and all of these different things. There's a lot of their beers have some really interesting things going on with them. But yeah, the other interesting thing about this brewery is the name. So the name Nöösker apparently comes from a dialect of Estonian called Kolgajani, and it means Rahutu Loom, or restless animal, as it would be in English. So this beer could be considered as their kind of self-titled beer, I guess. But the idea behind this name, as explained to me by one of the owners, and he wrote this to me, so this is a direct quote. So he says, "We are all restless in some way. The wish to understand ourselves and the world around us is familiar to everyone. To create something with our senses or hands is inherent to all of us." So the Nöösker, or restless animal, as we explained already, inside us urges us to contemplate the universe, search for right and wrong, and do something intriguing and compelling, while at the same time nurturing our true selves. What we really want to say is that life, with all its beauty, sorrow, passion and pain, is worth living. We hope you have enough of that restless animal to get it right, or that restlessness to get it right, I should say. But yeah, I thought that was quite nice, so I thought it was good not to kind of paraphrase that and just to read it to you as a quote. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about the brewery for the moment. That's all the information I have for the history section. A special thank you to Christian for giving me all that information to share with you here on the video. And yeah, I wrote them an email and asked them for a little bit of information because there was virtually nothing available about this brewery. In fact, I couldn't even find out one of the owners' names, and usually that's the key thing to find. If you can find one of the owners' names, usually you can use that to find newspaper articles and things. So Christian's help was highly appreciated in this one. So yeah, that's it. Let's actually have a taste of this beer then and see how we get on. I'll just let you have a little look at the artwork on this one before we open it up. As you can see, it's a little bit unique and pretty cool, I have to say. There you can see, I think that is a meerkat that's on this one. There you go. Just tilt that for you. I've got the light right behind me just to light up the can nicely. But I think the can art on this one is very, very nice. But yeah, this one was brewed at Nöösker Pruulikoda as well, as I say, in the southeast. But yeah, Christian actually did write a few things about this beer to me as well, but I wanted to kind of do the tasting myself, so we won't really use those, unfortunately. But yeah, it says, "After 5 years of brewing, the Nöösker in us still remains restless. Here's to calmer times." But yeah, this beer was brewed for their 5th birthday. It was intended to be a hoppy brown ale in the beginning, and they wanted it to mature to a more kind of oaky and rounded brown ale later on. So apparently what they used in this beer was Provoke hops, which is a mixture of both hop and oak chips. So I think this one could turn out to be really interesting. And you can see on the side here that they are describing it as an oaky brown ale, and you can also see the Nöösker symbol at the top there, which is pretty cool. But Christian tells me that this brewery, if you like, is basically just a big hobby, if you like, that they do. So yeah, it's pretty cool, this one. So I guess I was quite lucky to pick this one up. So the malt base in this one does have, it is mainly barley malt, but there is some wheat in this too. So yeah, let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. Very curious to see what it has in store for us. There we are. And yeah, here we are. We've got it open. I was worried in case it exploded, but yeah, this is my first brown ale in ages actually. Like I said to you at the start of the video, this one is an 8% American brown ale, according to Untappd at least, or they're just, Nöösker of course are just describing it as a brown ale, but I think that's about, 75-80% of the beer in the glass, and I guess we can have a look at it as it stands. So yeah, before the head disappears on this one, you can see that this beer has poured with about a half finger of a frothy, I would say fawn or very kind of light beigey coloured head. The beer itself is a lovely, rich kind of mahogany colour. Yeah, I'd say it's more mahogany than copper. It's got a little bit of a kind of reddish tint to it. As you can see, it's not dark enough to be chestnut. I think it's fair to describe this one as a nice, rich sort of mahogany colour. So certainly nothing surprising about this beer in terms of its appearance, to be honest. You can get brown ales that are a little bit more hazy. We'll need to check that later on. Of course, we'll put the rest of the beer in and just see if it becomes a little bit hazy. There probably will be a little bit of sediment in this, of course, because it's been in the fridge for a wee while actually. It took me longer to get round to filming this one than I would have liked, but yeah, that's the nature of some of these very small breweries, especially from very small countries. Getting information on some of these is very difficult, because remember, Estonia is only like 1.3 million people, if I'm remembering rightly. So yeah, it wasn't really any newspaper articles in this brewery, so yeah, that was quite a challenge. And I've still got a few other breweries that are kind of in the same vein as this. But yeah, as we say, beautiful colour. of this beer. Remember, the colour of your beer is dependent on 1, the type of malts that you use, 2, the length of your wort boil, and 3, any adjuncts, and 4, any barrel aging that you do on these is also going to affect the colour. But remember, the malts determine the magnitude of your colour, and then the length of your wort boil. Also, if you make a longer wort boil, essentially you caramelise the sugars a little bit more, and thus you get a darker colour of beer out of it. I'm not sure exactly what length of wort boil you would use for an American brown ale, right enough. It's not a style I've ever homebrewed or taken part in homebrewing of, but yeah, it certainly looks quite nice, this one. But nothing particularly surprising about this beer in terms of its appearance when you consider what style it is. As I say, the only thing other than that really to comment on would be the fact that this one is crystal clear, and quite often these beers can be a little bit hazy as well. So yeah, let's take a closer look at the aroma of this one and see how we get on then. I'm very, very curious about this. Ooh, now that is interesting. So this beer, you can smell a little bit of the kind of hoppy, the hoppy stuff that's left over in this one. So you can feel a little bit of the hoppiness still lingering there, but the backbone of the beer is this, you know, definitely oaky, woody kind of thing. But there is a wee bit of a sort of, you know, kind of, I hesitate to say herbal, but there's a little bit of a kind of herbally, kind of spicy thing going on in there as well, which is really interesting. Yeah. So yeah, it's really interesting, this one, I have to say. But on top of that, you've got a good little bit of a kind of regular barley, sort of biscuity, bready kind of thing going on with this beer as well. This is an interesting one for sure. So I love reviewing beers like this on the channel, things that are just quirky and unusual. That's, you know, why we do these videos. And just because it's fun, I just like trying different beers. Very rarely drink beer outside of these videos, of course. It is more, for me, I'm more of a taster than a drinker, if that makes sense. But yeah, this one's really, really interesting. So let's try and break down the aroma of this beer for you a little bit more. But like I say, interesting. Good little bit of hoppy character, nice little bit of the kind of oaky, adjuncty sort of backbone, if you like, to it. But then a really interesting kind of almost slightly English brown ale character. So it's got a wee bit of that traditional, more malty English brown ale character to it, but it's certainly got a wee bit of the hoppiness you'd expect from the and the sweetness as well, I would say, from the American variety. So yeah, let's describe this a wee bit more. So yeah, when you take the beer in, when you take the aroma of the beer in, you can smell this sort of dry, woody character coming out from underneath. I think if I was smelling it blind without knowing what it was, I would definitely pick out that it's woody, but I don't know if I would necessarily be able to tell you that it's oak. And this is one of the interesting things when you talk about beers that are barrel aged rather than having, you know, like the oak chips or whatever put into them. It's quite interesting because the wood, I think, when you add the oak chips, the wood comes across as being a lot more sort of dry, and a lot more kind of almost a little touch spicy. Whereas if you're talking about barrel aged beers, of course, the wood comes across as very, very smooth and almost slick in a way. And you know, using oak chips, I've had quite a few beers that have used oak chips over the years, but it's not something that you come across all that often. So I think I would pick up the wood if I was doing this blind. I think I would pick up the wood in there, but I don't think I could tell you that it was oak. I'd say it was probably a very, very dry wood. So I need to remember this going forward, because I've picked up this trait in one or two beers. We did have a beer fairly recently, and I forget what one it was, but we did have another beer where there was wood chips in it, and it had the same kind of effect actually. But yeah, you've got this really sort of quite dry, woody backbone to this, and you don't even get a little touch of the vanilla out of this, which is something that you can quite often get. It almost just smells like a dry, oaky, well, dry wood rather. As I say, I wouldn't really pick up that it was oak, I don't think, from the aroma. I know that it's oak, obviously, though. But yeah, sitting on top of that, you do get a nice kind of bready quality out of this one, and I would describe it as being a kind of more wholemeally, brown bready type character. So there's definitely a little bit of that going on there. You can smell a nice kind of smooth oatmeally brown bready quality. Definitely some more bread crusty elements in there as well. A little bit of a kind of toasty, grainy kind of element to it. And the wheat, of course, is going to play a role in sort of thickening up the bread as well, because you can smell that the bread comes across as a little bit smooth. And I think the yeast is probably doing something quite interesting as well, because you do almost get a little bit of a kind of crackery type note out of this beer, I think, too. So yeah, few interesting things going on in this one for sure. This is definitely not a conventional beer by any stretch of the imagination, but that's not what these guys are going for. That's not what Nöösker want to do. They want to do something a bit unusual, as you can tell. Yeah, as I say, the bready stuff is interesting. Smooth oatmeal bread, bit of bread crust, smooth kind of white bready sort of thing in there. As we say, a little bit of a sort of crackery character as well, but I definitely get a wee bit of that kind of it's almost a slightly farmhousey, crackery, woody kind of yeasty character coming out of this beer too. So really interesting. The sort of woodiness and graininess that this beer has gives you a little bit of the impression of a more English brown ale, if you like. And I would say that the malty backbone of this one overall, it does lean towards that English side of things, but it's the hoppiness that displays the more American, that is representing the more American side of the beer actually. But yeah, on the brown sugars then, there is definitely a wee bit of a kind of sweetness to this one. You do get a little bit of a kind of straight up caramel in this one, but there is a wee bit of a more toasty brown sugar and a little bit of a McVitie's digestive biscuity sort of thing to the beer as well. So I do like how that goes together in this one. So that's very, very nice. But yeah, other than that, I don't think there's all that much to say about the malty side of things. I think that covers it quite well. It's a really unusual beer, this one, to kind of get your head around actually, but mainly an English smelling malt base, I would say, and I think it's the dryness of the wood that does a lot of that along with the breadiness. But yeah, hoppy side of things then. For me, you do get a little touch of earthiness out of this one. You can smell with this beer though that quite a bit of the hoppy character has dropped out of it. The older that it gets, of course, the more that's going to happen. American brown ales, when they're quite fresh, will have a decent bit of IBU and hop character behind them, or at least they used to. I don't know how that might have changed with the whole haze craze and things. IBUs have been going down over the last few years, but yeah, there is certainly a nice bit of earthiness in there. You do get a wee bit of a herbal quality as well, which builds a good bridge with the woody backbone, and I think there's a nice sort of mix of grassy and floral notes. It's not overly kind of spicy and piney or anything like that, but you do certainly get a little bit of you do certainly get a nice wee bit of kind of deep, a sort of bright floral aromaticity to it, and some nice citrusy, zesty qualities as well actually. So I can really appreciate how that goes about its business in this beer actually. So yeah, the green component of this one is quite nice, and just to have that little bit of citrusy character in this beer gives it a wee bit of character too. But let's look at the fruity side of things. So for me, the fruity side of this beer is quite interesting. It comes across as having a little bit, there's a teeny little bit of like a plummy raisiny note to it, but that's not too prominent. The fruity backbone of this beer is a little bit more about a kind of figgy note, or even it's maybe even very slightly blackcurranty. I think I'd be curious to know what hop they've used in this. But yeah, the fruity note in this one is very, very soft, as I say. A bit of a kind of figgy note, a little bit of a kind of very light blackcurranty sort of thing, but there are one or two wee raisiny sharp notes to it, maybe even a little bit of a kind of plum or something. And I'm almost tempted to say that there's a very slight peary note to this one, mixing in that with it. It is mainly a more red, fruity leaning character that you get out of the aroma of this beer. So yeah, I think that summarises the aroma of this one quite well actually, but I'm really not sure what to expect of this based on the aroma. So I think we should just pour the rest of it in and see how we go. So yeah, no sediment on the bottom of the can of this one either, and putting that last little bit in hasn't really changed it at all. You can only see little tiny bits of sediment in the bottom of this one, so yeah, that's not a big deal. So let me just line up the can once again and let's go for it. So yeah, this one is the Rahutu Loom Restless Animal from Nöösker Pruulikoda in Advere, and at the centre of Estonia. I think this is going to be really interesting. Let's get stuck into this one. Slanje, skull, cheers, or as they say over there, tervisex. Let's do it. Yeah. What I'll say about this one is, first impression, it's one of these beers where you take it in and you're like, all right, okay, what's going on here? When does it come? And then you get a really nice, you get a very interesting aftertaste on it for sure. So this beer, it's actually quite light and drinkable, I think, but the aftertaste is where all of these interesting flavours come out of it. So yeah, I think they've done. I think Nöösker have done something really quite interesting with this, and this is why we do these videos, because you can find really interesting and quite quirky beers. But yeah, I like this one. I will also say you can feel the alcohol in this one a little bit. You do get a wee bit of warmth in here at 8%. I mean, I would say that just on the first impression as well, it could, it might have been better to give this one a slightly longer wort boil and just make it a wee bit thicker. If you're going for the brown ale, maybe you want the beer just to be a little bit more oily than this one is. But in terms of the flavour profile, I think this is really quite interesting and pretty nice actually. So thumbs up to them for this. That's it. Interesting beer for sure. But let's try and have a go at this and break down the flavour for you a wee bit more kind of succinctly and in a more detailed way. But yeah, on the second sip as well, you can feel that it's the flavours really, once you've got over the kind of initial intake of this beer, it really starts to kind of deepen a little bit, this one. So yeah, this is interesting for sure. But let's go for it then. So straight away across the middle of your palate, and this is both middle third and back third of your palate, you can definitely feel that kind of dry, woody backbone to it, that dry, oaky, woody backbone to it. As I say, if you had a kind of bourbon barrel-aged beer or whatever, you would get a real kind of smoothness and slickness across the base of your palate in this one. But this one, really comes across as quite dry in a sense in that way. The woody character you get out of this one is actually quite dry. It's not, dry and bitter, sort of dry or bitter in a sense, but I think it just works really nicely with just that wee bit of dryness. And I think if you go towards the front half of that, middle third of your palate, I think you do get a little bit of vanilla out of this one. You do get just a little touch of vanilla, but the wood for me is quite dry and quite smooth in a sense. But yeah, that's the backbone of the beer. But I would say the malty aspects of this one, I think, sit on top of this and balance the beer out really nicely. So in that middle third of your palate, you can feel there is a little bit of a kind of bready layer to this one. So I think the wheat will be contributing to that. And it's like on top of the wood in that middle third of your palate, you've got a little bit of a kind of smooth, wheaty layer in there. And the bready flavours that you get as a result of that do come across as kind of, more brown bready or wholemealy bread, maybe even rye bready, because there is a bit of graininess there. But at either end of that middle third of your palate, you certainly have a more kind of bread crusty quality. Sitting on top of this, though, you do get the brown sugars, and the brown sugars come across in this sort of very slick and not too thick, kind of oval, if you like. So in the dead centre of your palate, you can feel there is quite a concentrated kind of brown sugary element to this one. So yeah, you can feel that right in the centre of your palate. There is a wee bit of that slightly more concentrated, treacly molasses sort of thing to it. But as you move further out from that, you can feel that it does, as you just move out from that dead centre of your palate, you can feel it becomes a little bit more sort of caramelly in a sense, but it's actually quite like a toasted caramel, and it comes across as being a little bit more dry. But the thing to remember though is it might just be the dryness from the wood that's giving you that. But as you push out towards the extremities of that middle third of your palate, you certainly get a little bit more of a kind of biscuity, McVitie's digestive biscuity sort of thing out of this one, or cookie. There's definitely a wee bit more of that kind of grainy, biscuity, cookie type brown sugar to this beer. Now, I think this is where the root of the thing that I'm saying. This beer could just do with being a little bit thicker, to be honest with you. I think this one might have benefited from having just a little bit more of a longer wort boil, because it comes across as quite slick in a sense. It's got a little bit of slickness and stuff to it, but It's kind of got a sort of similar mouthfeel to it that you'd expect of, say, like a Helles, or you know, like a German, probably a German Dunkel. It's a better one example. The mouthfeel of this is quite similar to a German Dunkel, and I think if you're going to go for a brown ale, you do want the beer just to be a little bit thicker than this. So I think, in retrospect, I don't know how long they would have boiled the wort for, but it does feel, the mouthfeel of this one does make it feel like the wort boil is a fairly short one in a sense. So if you know, maybe if they're doing more brown ales later, I would say yeah, give it a bit of a longer wort boil and thicken it up a little bit. But yeah, the flavour, that's a kind of minor point actually, but the flavour profile that you get out of this one is really quite interesting, and it certainly really leans, the middle of your palate, at least that middle third of your palate, really leans towards the slightly dry, woody notes that you get out of the beer. But the bread crust and the kind of brown sugary elements in there are quite interesting for sure. But let's focus on the other parts of the beer then. So border region between middle third and back third of your palate, then you can feel a little bit of a kind of bread crusty build up on there. Then as you go into the back third of your palate, you can feel that sort of wholemealy brown bready kind of thing sitting on top of the wood is a little bit kind of thicker, and I would say you get a little touch more graininess at the extreme back of your palate, but sitting on top of that, pardon me, you can feel a little bit of yeastiness coming out of the beer, and the flavour on the back third of your palate is a little bit taller, so there's a kind of airy, kind of more brown bready character coming out of this one. So yeah, you can feel that just kind of as you go further forward on the palate, you can feel that it just the flavour just condenses down a little bit. Then as you go into the middle third of your palate, the flavour is quite is a little bit more kind of squashed and condensed together. But yeah, I think that covers the sort of malty and yeasty components of the beer, if you like. So let's focus on the hops and the fruit then. So back corners of the palate, there's definitely a wee touch of earthiness in there. As you move further forward, it's a little bit more herbal, and as you reach the kind of front corners of the palate, you can feel there's a fair little bit of kind of floral aromaticity to this one. It feels that if I'd drunk this beer a little bit younger than I am, it feels like it would actually have been a little bit kind of spicy almost, which is interesting. But yeah, nice little bit of spiciness, a little bit of a kind of floral aromaticity, and then round the front curve of the palate, it's a little bit lighter and more kind of grassy in a sense. So yeah, I like how that goes together. So the green component is quite nice for sure. I do like the little bit of hoppiness that that this beer has. So yeah, let's focus on that front third of your palate then. I don't think there's too much more that we need to say about the green component in this one. So yeah, front third of your palate then. Border region between front third and middle third of your palate. Again, you get a little bit of a kind of bready build up in there and a wee bit of bread crust. Then the base of that front third of your palate is a little bit more kind of smooth and bready and kind of woody and things like that. And then sitting on top of that front third of your palate, that's where you get the nice oily bubble where those juicy fruity esters roll their way out of the beer. So yeah, the fruity part of the beer there, it's quite interesting. Like it's actually quite similar to what you get from the Aroma, to be honest with you. There's a fair wee bit of dried fruit to this beer as well though, so the beer almost has a little tiny hint of cakiness at the very back of that front third of your palate too. But yeah, there is a wee touch of a raisiny sharpness to this one, but underneath that, it's like a kind of juicy sultana type quality that you get out of this one. I'd maybe want to say a little bit datey as well, or something like that. But yeah, back half of that front third of your palate is it's quite oily and sultana-like. To be clear, sultana is the dried white green grapes, maybe a little bit of a kind of datey character in there, and there's a wee touch of a more raisiny dried kind of purple grape sitting on top of that. But as you move further forward in this one, you do get a little hint of it starts to move towards a more kind of in the front half of that front third of your palate, you start to get a little bit of a kind of juicy figgy sort of thing out of it, and you also start to get a little bit of a you start to get a wee bit of a kind of blackcurranty element to it as well, which is interesting. And I think it's the figs and the blackcurrant flavours that really linger the further you go into the aftertaste. So yeah, a good contrast in the fruity character this one. Quite a bit of sultana and a bit of date, and then, you know, blackcurrant and yeah, a bit of blackcurrant and you know, fig on the front of it. So yeah, interesting flavour composition this one, that's for sure. Let's round off with the mouthfeel, but we've talked about that quite a bit already. So the mouthfeel of this one, as I say, it's quite, it's actually pushing towards the bottom end of mid-bodied. The carbonation is smooth, the beer is quite slick, and it has a really kind of wet mouthfeel in a sense. And that's my one criticism of the beer, is that I think it should be a little bit thicker. Now I would wonder, because with barrel aging you always sacrifice a bit of the mouthfeel to get those kind of infused flavours. I do wonder if the wood chips have taken away from the thickness of the mouthfeel here, but I would just want this beer to be a little bit more oily and a little bit more thick, I guess we could say. That's my one criticism of this one, because it is brewed as to be something a bit different, but I would say that the mouthfeel of this one could do with being a little bit thicker. I think a brown ale has to have an element of thickness to it, whereas this one, it's almost quite similar to, you know, a German Dunkel in terms of its mouthfeel. It just needs that little bit more thickness to it. But that's, I think, a kind of minor point. We should focus more on the flavour of the beer, and that, you know, that is good. But the malty backbone of this one and the adjuncty sort of thing, like I say, the adjunct really gives the beer, the wood chips really gives the beer a bit of dryness, but you've got a good little bit of a kind of smooth, and that's kind of affected as well by the breadiness and the smoothness that you get from the barley malt and the wheat in this beer, and then there is just a wee bit of a sweetness and toastiness out of that malt base as well. So the malt base and the adjuncty thing in the middle of your palate is where the majority of the complexity in this one is. The IBUs, I don't know what they would be for this. Yeah, the IBUs for me, I think this beer would potentially be, you know, like a 60, 70 IBU beer, potentially even more than that. When the beer was fresh, but you can still feel a little bit of that lingering in this one. So I'm not sure what to rate this, but I think it would be at least 60 IBUs. I think would probably be the minimum, I would say, for this one. But always take my IBU counts with a pinch of salt, because this is my weakest area of beer reviewing. And then it's got a nice kind of oily, fruity character to it. A little bit of juiciness in there, but some nice dry fruity characters as well. But yeah, I think that's all we need to say about this beer. Filming this review tired, so it is a little bit longer, as they say, but then you get some beers like this that just really challenge you a little bit. So yeah, I think we should leave it at that for this review. So yeah, this one was the Rahutu Loom, an oaky brown ale, I guess we could say. That certainly is the case, from Nöösker Pruulikoda in Advere, in the middle of Estonia. A really interesting beer, this one. Nice to do another Estonian review after quite a while. So yeah, I think we can leave it there. So yeah, once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Thank you once again to Christian for giving me the information on this brewery. It's been really cool to review this one for you. Let me know your own thoughts on it in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from this brewery, and do let me know any other Estonian breweries that you would recommend. Some brown ale recommendations are always welcome too. But yeah, the Rahutu Loom, an 8% oaky brown ale from Nöösker Pruulikoda in Advere in central Estonia. Slàinte, skål, cheers, tervisex, and thanks for watching.